The journey to develop and market a human drug can be long, complex, and filled with regulations. But FDA CDER Small Business and Industry Assistance, or SBIA, is here to help. SBIA provides education and answers to help all regulated pharmaceutical industries, not just small business, all over the world. What do we offer? Web resources for all your questions and training needs. The popular Regulatory Education for Industry, or REdI conferences. Free events that offer direct interaction with FDA subject matter experts and provides RAC credits. We offer free webinars to share FDA's knowledge and expertise, featuring live question and answer sessions, video and audio archives, and virtual attendance from anywhere in the world. We publish the CDER SBIA Chronicles, a brief e-newsletter and podcast that highlight a specific and timely regulatory topic. And we offer in-depth CDER Learn, web-based learning tutorials. Stay current by signing up for our listserv, or connect via LinkedIn. And best of all, everything is free.
I hope you all enjoyed that short animated video. My name is Lieutenant Commander Renu and I work with Brenda and the rest of the SBIA team. In this presentation, we're going to take a step away from those in-depth regulatory topics and discuss our CDER SBIA, or Small Business and Industry Assistance Program, the program that brought you this amazing conference this week, and how you can leverage SBIA resources to educate yourself and to find answers to your questions. In today's presentation, I will focus on how SBIA can assist you. So after listening to this presentation, you should be able to locate our SBIA webpage and identify the resources it provides, identify at least 3 services that SBIA offers to assist the pharmaceutical industry, and finally understand how to register for our SBIA events and also find recordings of the past events in the case that you missed them live. So within CDER, we have the Office of Communications, and under the Office of Communications there are 3 divisions, one of which is our Division of Drug Information, or DDI. DDI handles thousands of inquiries that come into CDER, and we work very closely with other offices to anticipate and respond to major initiatives. And Small Business and Industry Assistance, or SBIA, falls within the Division of Drug Information. SBIA recently revised our mission to better reflect our current actions and also to encompass our aspirations. Our mission is to provide industry stakeholders with immediate access to resources, education, and training, which allows for a more clearly informed and efficient developmental process and is aligned with CDER's goal of approving safe and effective human drugs and biopharmaceuticals. FDA's philosophy is that timely, interactive communication with sponsors during drug development is a core activity to help achieve our mission and to facilitate the conduct of efficient and effective drug development programs. And so ultimately the goal is to enhance public health by making new, safe, and effective drugs available to the American public in a timely manner. And we know that on the industry side, it is not always easy to navigate these complex regulatory processes. So then CDER SBIA often becomes the first stop for a pharmaceutical business trying to contact the agency. Our goal is to help these small pharmaceutical and large pharmaceutical businesses, all of industry really, navigate the wealth of information that FDA offers and to assist in understanding human drug product regulation. We want to ensure that industry stakeholders have immediate access to resources, education and training, and so forth, allowing for a more clearly informed and efficient development process with the goal of approving safe and effective human drugs and biopharmaceuticals. And our vision is really to become this premier educational source, to serve as the premier educational source on human drug and biopharmaceutical development and regulation. We want industry to come to us for the answers and for support. And we believe that with our real-time support for industry that you all can be better informed and in turn will have increased constructive interactions with FDA. So like I said, though our focus is on small business, our resources and outreach activities really extend to all of the regulated pharmaceutical industry and are not restricted to small business. Really for SBIA purposes, the term small business is defined as a business that has fewer than 500 employees, including employees of affiliates, but like I said, we are not restrictive. And SBIA is open to everyone. You don't have to qualify by the size of the business. We do help all of industry, but we do focus on helping small businesses since they may not have that expertise and the know-how of large companies. As you can see on this pie chart here, the majority of people that attend our events are from large pharma with more than 500 employees, but that means that about half of them are from small pharma. And this map here shows an overview of where our audience is located. So this map represents the reach of last year's regulatory best practices for global access to medicines conference. So you can see that we have a very global reach since companies can benefit from pretty much all of our services online, and approximately 30% of our audience is outside the US. So I'm now going to review the various resources that we offer through SBIA, including direct communication services, our web pages, our training resources, and our news and updates. Let's take a look at some of SBIA's outreach services in detail. So we have a staff of over 35 healthcare professionals that answer direct inquiries from industry via phone and email. You call us, we will answer. You email us, we will respond. We have dedicated phone numbers and email addresses, as you can see here on the slide. Last year alone, we responded to over 6,000 inquiries. So we receive a wide variety of questions and we respond pretty quickly, whether it's providing you with an answer or letting you know that we need to consult a different group within FDA or provide you with information on whom you should be contacting, but we always get back to you in a timely manner. So for instance, if a question is specific to an existing IND, the sponsor would really need to reach out to their FDA regulatory project manager. And if it's, a general question about guidances and so on, we can respond to that. And the service is available to anyone, like I mentioned, so please take advantage and contact us with your questions. A huge part of SBIA is our outreach to stakeholders via our Regulatory Education for Industry or REdI conferences. And though we're currently at the REdI annual conference, we use REdI to describe our topic-specific conferences too. So that's, so to speak, our trademark. Our audience for these events is small manufacturers of drug products who wish to learn, and large, who wish to learn about how FDA approaches drug regulation. We typically have a hybrid format for all topic-specific conferences where people can attend in person or online. However, since the public health emergency, we have switched to 100% virtual. In 2022, we hosted 9 conferences and workshops and reached over 84,000 people in 130 countries via conferences, webinars, and recordings. And we continue to innovate and provide new and useful information for our stakeholders. Last year, we introduced a workshop on regulatory best practices for global access to medicines, including anti-tuberculosis medicines, where we collaborated with USAID, USP, and the World Health Organization, and reached low and middle income countries with top attendance from India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya. We also last year partnered with FDA's National Center for Toxicological Research in the Nano Day Symposium we put on to address the development of products that contain nanomaterials in their formulation. And all of these conferences and workshops, I will get to this in a couple slides, but they're all, if you missed it, they're all posted online on YouTube. We also offer various types of continuing education credits depending on the conference, sometimes providing CEs to support RAPS, SOCRA, SQA, and ACRP, and sometimes providing CE for healthcare professionals. And most, if not all, like I said, of our conferences and workshops are recorded and they are absolutely free. So in addition to our conferences and workshops, we offer free webinars, most of which also feature a question and answer or Q&A session with the FDA subject matter experts. Examples of recent webinars include an update on field alert reports and biological product deviation reports. We've had some on OTC monograph, so OTC monograph drug user fee program, or OMUFA, fiscal year 2023 user fees and registrations. We just recently held that. We recently held a webinar on PDUFA 3 scientific meetings. We've had a webinar on electronic systems, electronic records, and electronic signatures, statistical approaches to establishing bioequivalence, and many, many more. And like I said, these recordings are all available on our webpage and on YouTube. So we also have a newsletter, which we call the SBIA Chronicles. We publish this every couple months. They're short 2-page electronic newsletters and audio podcasts. They're accompanied by audio podcasts that we write and we record. We highlight different regulatory issues each time, and we usually interview a subject matter expert depending on the topic. So some sample topics we've published on recently include pharmacodynamic biomarkers and biosimilars, cannabis and cannabis-derived compounds, adverse events associated with compounded drugs from outsourcing facilities, and continuous manufacturing. So here's a snapshot of our SBIA webpage, our landing page. If you've never visited, I highly recommend that you bookmark it, fda.gov/CDER SBIA. Our web pages are another means by which we reach out to industry stakeholders. This here is the SBIA landing page, and it really does contain very useful resources that you may have never even known existed. Up top here, we have a calendar of upcoming events, or SBIA conferences, workshops, and webinars with links to the registration. And this is just the first half of the page. And this is the middle of the page. So as you can see here, there are 4 graphics. Each are hyperlinked to different web pages. The first box is our regulatory references web page, which is essentially a database of regulatory information, which you can search, and I will show you that in detail. We then have our SBIA Learn online training repository. And this repository contains links to all of our SBIA events and also future events, and going back 3 years. It's not only the events, but it also has links to other training opportunities and our Chronicles newsletters, online courses, things like that. The third box is a link to SBIA on the LinkedIn platform, an invitation to connect. And then the fourth box, it links to the SBIA Learning Library on YouTube. So let's go through these subpages one by one. So when you click on this first regulatory references webpage, it brings you to this webpage right here. Like I said, it's a database of information for industry stakeholders. Essentially, a systematic compilation of FDA web pages and very easy to search. So here you can find information on different topics related to drug development, from INDs to new drugs to generics, OTCs, information on submissions, labeling, manufacturing, quality, safety, and so on. Just so much more. And you can either use the topic drop-down bar to search for topics, or you can simply use the search bar, or a combination of the two. So here, I've just taken a screenshot showing you what the topic drop-down looks like. So if you find yourself lost looking for something on the FDA website, rather than turning to Google, come here first. That next graphic, the second graphic on the main SBIA landing page, was to the SBIA Learn online training repository, which is basically a database of training information for industry. So this is where you can find links to all the trainings I mentioned, both past and upcoming. Not only does it contain links to the web pages for the SBIA conferences, workshops, and webinars, which in turn contain links to the recordings and slides, but it also contains additional training and learning resources, as I mentioned, such as our SBIA newsletters and courses. And again, this database is searchable by keyword, or you can filter by topic as well. If you click on the topic caret, you'll find a drop-down menu where you can choose topics such as biosimilars, clinical trials and research, drug development, drug master files, drug quality, and so on. And again, I forgot to mention, you can see here I've included the QR codes for each of these pages, so make sure you bookmark them. Going back to the graphics on the SBIA landing page, that last graphic was for the SBIA YouTube Learning Library, which contains our most viewed recordings and contains links to the YouTube playlists. You can also browse our recordings directly from YouTube by visiting the Food and Drug Administration channel on YouTube, clicking on Playlists, and then clicking on the CDER Small Business and Industry Assistance playlist. You'll notice there's multiple organized by years. There's 2023, 2022, I think going back to 2017 or 2018. And the SBIA playlists are all easily identifiable with our trademark orange fiery stripe, and they contain the recordings of our SBIA conferences, workshops, and webinars, and which we try to make available within 2 weeks after each event. We post a lot of recordings and we get viewership from all over the globe. In 2021 alone, we posted 225 recordings of presentations with over 477,000 views. So these are very useful. The individual YouTube recordings are also found within the event pages in the SBIA Learn database. But this is another mechanism to browse the events and click directly on the recording links to view them. So we have multiple ways to get to this information. And although we have these recordings available, we still highly encourage you to attend real-time in person and take advantage of the live Q&A sessions to interact with FDA experts and get answers to your questions right on the spot. Real-time attendance to many of our webinars and conferences will also enable you to receive continuing education credits sometimes for physicians, pharmacists, and nurses when offered, and a certificate of appreciation, which supports CEs for RAP, SOCRA, SQA, and ACRP, just depending on the event. And finally, the landing page also promotes our SBIA on LinkedIn, and it leads to our LinkedIn page for SBIA. We currently have over 27,000 followers, and we use LinkedIn to push information out to industry stakeholders. This could include information about CDER and FDA meetings, conferences, workshops, and webinars, Federal Register notices, new announcements, new initiatives. We also have these fun polling questions that we recently started for many of our events, and which I hope many of you have taken in anticipation of this conference. So we encourage you to participate. It's a great way to test your knowledge and kind of anticipate and figure out what's in store for you during the conference, and to get your questions answered there. In addition to LinkedIn, we also disseminate information to industry via our email listserv or distribution list. We have over 143,000 subscribers, and we issue information daily regarding new regulations, FDA announcements and initiatives, webinars, conferences, and more. So you can find a link to sign up for the emails right from our landing page, which was fda.gov/CDER SBIA. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, there's a bar where you can type in your email address and just click subscribe. So this brings us to challenge question number 1. In which of the SBIA resources can you find a database of searchable FDA web pages relating to drug development? A, regulatory references. B, SBIA Learn online training repository. C, in the calendar of upcoming events. Or D, on the SBIA Learning Library on YouTube. I'll give you a minute to answer that. So if you chose answer A, this is correct by clicking on the box titled Regulatory References on fda.gov/CDER SBIA. You will find a searchable database of regulatory information, which includes a great deal of information on drug development. Note that the SBIA Learn online training repository contains links to recordings of webinars, conferences, and workshops rather than to web pages about specific information about a topic. And challenge question number 2, which of the following statements is not true? A, you can stay connected with the latest regulatory information and offerings by subscribing to the SBIA listserv and following SBIA on LinkedIn. B, industry stakeholders may call or email SBIA directly. C, SBIA services are only available to companies with less than 500 employees, including affiliates. Or D, SBIA offers many free conferences, webinars, and workshops on various regulatory topics. So which of these statements is not true? And the incorrect answer, is C. So SBIA services are available to all industry stakeholders, regardless of company size. So I hope that I have enlightened you today with information about the SBIA program and how to leverage SBIA as a regulatory resource. All of our programs are geared towards training and educating industry across the entire spectrum of drug development. So here I leave you with some action items. Email or call SBIA with your regulatory questions. We respond Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Here's our contact information. Bookmark these web pages, fda.gov/CDER SBIA and fda.gov/CDER SBIA Learn. And you'll get access to all of this great information that we provide. Browse our SBIA playlists on FDA's YouTube channel. And finally, follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our listserv to stay in the know and to stay connected. We're really doing all that we can to help industry, to help you, and to achieve our vision to serve as the premier educational source on human drug and biopharmaceutical development and regulation. So I thank you for your attention today, and I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, so we will now launch into our Q&A session. So please enter your questions into the Q&A chat pod if you have not already, and we'll answer as many questions as time allows. It looks like we have a few questions that have been submitted. Our first question: should SBIA be the first point of contact for questions that we can't find the answers for online? For example, would you refer us to the appropriate resource or a person to contact? So great question. Yes, if you cannot find the answer to your question, please feel free to contact us, contact SBIA via email or phone, and we will either answer your question or consult the appropriate group within FDA, or we will point you in the right direction. So if you don't know where to go, contact us and we will help you. Hopefully we can answer your question, but if not, we'll get it from the correct subject matter expert within FDA, or we'll let you know where to go for answers. Okay, we have a couple more questions. Question 2, have you considered providing your conferences and webinars in different time zones to make it easier to attend for people in different areas of the world? So we do recognize that a lot of you are not in the US, are not in Eastern time, and we appreciate that you are dialing in from wherever in the world you are. And we have considered, timing our conferences at different times to accommodate everybody, but as you can imagine, there's so many different time zones, so it's very difficult to accommodate everyone. We have people attending from India, China, Europe, Africa, different time zones in the US, and from all over the world. So we need to consider all that. We also need to consider the availability of our FDA faculty. So it's easiest to stick to Eastern time. There are some exceptions though. For example, there was one pharmaceutical quality extended webinar that we did a few years ago. We called it Midnight Madness. And that was specifically for industry in India and China, where it was the middle of the night here in the US. And we were able to provide that extended webinar in their time zone. But I don't think we'll be able to repeat such a time zone accommodation. It's very difficult coordinating all the speakers here in a different time zone. But we do record the events. We post them to YouTube, so you can always watch them later. You won't be able to receive the continuing education credits or submit the survey to obtain the certificate of attendance, but you will be able to get the information via those recordings. Okay, I have a question. Can we ask an IND NDA specific question? So if you you can contact SBIA with your questions and we'll direct you. If it's something that's specific to an existing application, you would need to contact your project manager for that because there's just so many nuances. We can provide you with general information and guidances, but if it's specific to an existing application, your review team is the one you should be communicating with. Let me see. Okay. Another question. When and where would the recordings for the REdI conference be posted? So for the REdI conference or for any other conferences that we offer, we usually have the recordings up within 2 weeks and in this case, it would be the 2023 playlist of FDA's YouTube channel. So if you visit fda.gov/CDER SBIA Learn and click on the REdI conference, it will lead you to the YouTube recordings once posted. And we will also send out an email message for those who register. We'll send out an email message through our distribution list to let people know that the recordings are available. But it's 2 weeks for them, about 2 weeks, sometimes sooner, for the recordings to be posted on YouTube. You can also go to YouTube, go to the FDA channel, and then click on playlists, and you'll see all the SBIA playlists there. Okay, do you work with NIH to help companies in very early stages of drug development looking for grants? So in the past, we have worked closely with NIH. They used to have this annual conference and offered live consultation at these conferences from many different government entities, and we were one of them. So we used to go and participate in this live consultation. And we still work with NIH to help them in a variety of different capacities, but not via that conference. And we're, of course, available via phone or email to answer questions. Okay. Let me see. Does SBIA work with the Office of New Drugs to review applications? We do not work with the Office of New Drugs to review applications, but we often consult them when we receive questions from industry. So we can contact them. We can contact the reviewers or whoever it is in the division if there's certain questions that we need to consult out. And we also, as you can tell from all of our speakers and panelists, we work very closely with the Office of New Drug staff to put on conferences and webinars and all of our events, and to put out our different courses and newsletters. We're always working with them and to determine what it is that we can provide to industry for training and education. So they may tell us what it is that their division needs to, what messages they need to put out to industry, and we help provide that outreach. When will the slides be posted to our website for this conference? So probably within a month. So the recording should be up within 2 weeks, but the slides probably a month, give or take. Okay, we do have a couple more questions. Can we find the clinical trial results of a certain drug in regulatory references? So we get this question quite a bit, people looking for the results of clinical trials. So FDA does not publish the clinical trial results. If an application has been approved, you can find some of the information in the review documents posted in FDA's Drugs at FDA database, which is right on our website. You can look the drug up by the name or the application number, click on review documents, and you'll see FDA's review of the clinical trials. But if a clinical trial is unpublished, you're not going to find it on FDA's website. Okay. Although SBIA is under CDER, do you give equal attention to CBER products and topics? So we do sometimes include CBER topics or topics that apply to both CDER and CBER, but our main focus is CDER. On occasion, an SBIA webinar will address cross-center guidances and topics, and will include faculty from all the relevant centers, including CBER and CDRH, if applicable. And this conference, as you know, is cross-center with all 3 centers, but we do try to work with them. I think that's all the questions we have for now. Let me just take one more look. Yeah, I think I've covered it all. So thank you for your great questions. I appreciate them. We can now move on to our next 2 speakers, Dr. LaShawn Schnupp and Dr. Lolita Sterrett. Our first speaker, Dr. LaShawn Schnupp, is a Senior Regulatory Health Project Manager and STAR Program Manager in the Program Development, Implementation, and Management staff within the Office of New Drugs, Office of Program Operations. She will be providing an overview of FDA Split Real-Time Application Review or STAR Pilot Program. Our second speaker, Dr. Lolita Sterrett, will present on use-related risk analysis and human factor protocol reviews, what to submit for an efficient review. Dr. Sterrett is Associate Director for Human Factors in the Division of Medication Error Prevention and Analysis 2, within the Office of Medication Error Prevention and Risk Management in CDER's Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology. For a complete biography on each presenter today, please refer to our speaker biographies located in the same area on our website as the conference agenda. Now, please join me to welcome our speakers.
Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it, and it's great to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is LaShawn Schnupp, and I'm the CDER Program Manager in the Office of Program Operations and part of the Program Development, Implementation, and Management staff. And today, I'll be discussing the Split Real-Time Application Review, or STAR Pilot Program, which started in October of 2022. So this slide provides the learning objectives for today's presentation for STAR, and we'll discuss the background of STAR, including PDUFA 7, and then I'll describe the STAR Pilot Program, including why this program was created, what it is, and its goals. I'll also describe the components of the overall STAR program. I'll outline CDER's review of STAR applications, and also share with you the STAR website. Then we'll go over a quick review of what we learned, as well as the program assessment for STAR. And then lastly, we'll review options for resources. So now we'll go over some of the background for STAR. And so under the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, or PDUFA 7, the STAR Pilot Program was introduced. And this program became available to applicants in October of 2022. So as you can see here, this is just a snapshot of the letter that can be found online and on the FDA website. And as you can see, STAR is listed under Section D of the letter. So now I'll be going over the STAR program in more detail in these next slides. So you may be asking why we created the STAR program. Well, during negotiations, industry raised a common problem that they faced, which is that typically all of their data sets and other application materials for a supplement are ready a couple of months in advance of 3 components of their applications, which are namely the clinical study report and then 2 of their integrated summaries for effectiveness and safety. And then in instances where the product is intended to treat an unmet medical need, that sometimes can represent a delay for patients getting access to these treatments. And so in order to try and address that problem, we created the STAR program. So what is the STAR program? Well, the STAR program is a pilot program for qualified priority efficacy supplements to be submitted in 2 well-defined parts. And I'll talk to you in just a minute about what those 2 well-defined parts are, but really the intent was to enable an earlier review and action in order to overcome the problem statement that I mentioned in the previous slide. So the overall goal is to shorten the time from the date of complete supplement submission to the action date in order to allow earlier patient access to therapies that address an unmet medical need. So that can be kind of confusing, and so I want to show you this graphic. Hopefully it'll help tell the story of the process I was describing earlier. So this slide compares STAR to a traditional application, and I'm going to go into more detail with subsequent slides. And so on this graphic, though, you'll notice that the blue bar, which is over here, this is the priority review bar for a typical efficacy supplement. And above that blue bar, you can see the red bar indicating the STAR review. So that's right over here. But you'll notice that it's shifted to the left. And you may have also noticed the other key components within the STAR overview timeline that are different from a normal supplement review. So, for instance, you may have noticed on this graphic that a STAR entry request meeting will need to be submitted in order for FDA to determine whether it's accepted into the program. So here is a STAR entry request. You can also see here that we receive the supplement as a split submission in 2 parts. So this is part 1 submission and part 2 submission. So once we receive part 1 and part 2, then we have a target action date at least 1 month in advance of the PDUFA goal date. So over here we have the STAR target action date, and this is the PDUFA goal date. And we'll go into more detail with subsequent slides, but as you can see here, FDA will begin application review upon receipt of Part 1 of that submission. And Part 1 really contains the entire application, everything we need to start the review, and the only things that are missing are those 3 components, which are the clinical study report and the 2 integrated summaries for safety and effectiveness, which I mentioned a moment ago. And those are often delayed on industry side as they go through levels of clearance. So part 2 then is those additional 3 components, again, specifically the clinical study report and the 2 integrated summaries. When we get the part 2 submission, that will complete the supplement, and that's when the PDUFA clock starts, which is shown here. And as noted in this graphic, you can see that FDA begins the application review with Part 1, which again is right over here. By the time we receive those last 3 components, it should hopefully enable FDA to take an earlier action when timing it by the PDUFA clock. So it's kind of a win-win situation where FDA still gets the full time to review, but then at the end of the day, we're hoping that we can get these treatments for unmet medical needs out to patients earlier. So the first component is a STAR entry request that gets submitted to the FDA and is reviewed and held either as a standalone TCON, where we simply just speak with the applicant about whether their supplement meets the criteria to get into the STAR program, or if they wanted to discuss content and format of their anticipated supplement, then the applicant would submit a Type B pre-submission meeting, just like they would now, and we would talk about STAR within the context of that Type B meeting, along with their other questions such as what would be submitted to the application. And please also note that if the STAR entry request is submitted as a standalone TCON, then there are no meeting minutes, but a formal letter is sent to document the decision. So we encourage an applicant to use option 2 only if questions related to what would be submitted in the application, such as Part 1 versus Part 2, will be asked. And in terms of the content of the request itself for the STAR entry request, the sponsors will submit the top-line results from their pivotal trials, and they'll also submit their proposed labeling, and then also an explanation of how the supplemental application meets the STAR criteria. And so please note that the acceptance into STAR does not guarantee an application approval. The application must still meet the applicable standard for an approval. So I mentioned that there is criteria for getting into the STAR program, and we'll be going over the 4 criteria. And as you look at the slide, you'll probably notice that the first 2 criteria look somewhat familiar, and that was intentional. So the first criteria states that clinical evidence from adequate and well-controlled investigations indicate that the drug may demonstrate substantial improvement on a clinically relevant endpoint over available therapies. And the second criteria states that the application is for a drug intended to treat a serious condition with an unmet medical need. So these are the same 2 criteria that we use in the Breakthrough Therapy Designation program. So the caveat, though, for STAR is that the application does not have to actually receive a formal Breakthrough Therapy Designation. And for other products and other centers, they won't actually have to have received other designations, such as the Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy or RMAT designation, but they do have to meet the same standards that's outlined here within criteria 1 and criteria 2. And so the last 2 criteria 3 and 4, they're really about timing and some aspects of the complexity of the supplement. So number 3 just states that the supplement can't have any component to it that would require a longer review time. And an example here would be a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, or a REMS, because it adds a complexity to an application. And then the last component on here, criteria number 4, it just points out that if there is a need to inspect a foreign manufacturing site, a supplement would also not qualify just due to the logistics of scheduling those inspections and getting them back. However, please note here that domestic site inspections may be allowed if it doesn't affect the expedited time frame. Also, please note here that STAR is limited to priority efficacy supplements, so a supplement must really qualify to be a priority review in order to get into the STAR program. Okay, so assuming an application gets into the STAR program, the applicant would submit their submission in 2 parts, as I mentioned earlier. And part 1 here is the entire application, everything needed to review, with the exception of those 3 components that take a little bit longer on the sponsor side, which are namely the clinical study report, the integrated summary of effectiveness, and the integrated summary of safety. And again, the review data begins at the receipt of part 1. However, the PDUFA clock doesn't start until part 2. So please also note that you may also contact the RPM for any questions, including questions regarding ECTD submissions. And in addition to the items mentioned in the earlier slide, we have some items here that we wanted to call to your attention that we've also asked to be included in part 1 as well, because these items are often submitted as part of the clinical study report. However, they are items that are ready earlier and that can be submitted with part 1. So part 1 should also include the tables, figures, and listings, as well as protocols and amendments for pivotal trials, the statistical analysis for pivotal trials, and the sponsor's high-level assessment summary of safety and efficacy results, as well as the death summaries. So, if FDA identifies substantive missing information, reviews will stop, and a revocation of STAR status letter may be issued. And please note that applicants who submit an incomplete Part 1, they can still resubmit a complete supplement at a later time, but it just will no longer be reviewed under the STAR program. So for Part 2, please note that it should be received no more than 3 months later and should include the remaining components of the supplement as listed here: the CSR, or Clinical Study Report, the ISC, and the ISS. And as mentioned earlier, the PDUFA clock starts upon receipt of the Part 2 submission. And again, it should be received no later than 3 months after the Part 1 submission. For Part 2, if the FDA identifies substantive missing information, then the reviews will stop, and a revocation of STAR status letter may be issued, and at that point, the application is treated like any other complete application and receive a refuse to file or an RTF. So, to summarize, for a STAR review, the review begins with the receipt of the Part 1 submission. The PDUFA clock starts when FDA receives the Part 2 submission, and then FDA will target an expedited review, which means an action at least 1 month before the PDUFA goal date. And so here we have a snapshot of the FDA STAR website, which launched again in October of 2022. It's another resource that goes into the overview, the eligibility criteria, any process considerations, as well as any additional clarifications. So please feel free to visit this website if you're looking for information for STAR. It is a great resource. So going forward, we'll be conducting an assessment of the STAR program, and the interim assessment will be conducted by the end of fiscal year 2025. And a public workshop will be conducted by the end of quarter 2 in fiscal year of 2026. And then please note here that the outputs from the assessment and workshop will be published in a publicly available report. So we have a few challenge questions to go over. And here is my first challenge question for all of you. When does FDA begin their review of a STAR application? Is it A, once the STAR program acceptance letter is issued? Or B, upon receipt of the STAR entry request? Or is it C, upon receipt of the STAR Part 1 submission? Or D, upon receipt of STAR Part 2 submission? Take a moment to see which answer you think is correct. And hopefully all of you selected answer C. The FDA will begin their review of a STAR application upon receipt of the STAR Part 1 submission. And again, Part 1 does contain the entire application except for the clinical study report, the integrated summary of effectiveness, as well as the integrated summary of safety. So for challenge question number 2, the question for all of you is, when does the PDUFA clock start for a STAR application? Is it A, once the STAR program acceptance letter is issued, or B, upon receipt of the STAR entry request, or is it C, upon receipt of the STAR Part 1 submission, or D, upon receipt of the STAR Part 2 submission? And again, take a moment to see which answer you think is correct. And hopefully all of you selected answer D. The PDUFA clock starts for a STAR application upon receipt of the STAR Part 2 submission. So for challenge question number 3, the question is, when is the integrated summary of safety submitted? Is it A, with the STAR entry request, or B, with the STAR Part 1 submission, or is it C, with the Part 2 submission, or D, 120 days after the complete supplement? And again, take a moment to see which answer you think is correct. And the answer here is C. The integrated summary of safety is submitted with the Part 2 submission. So these are some additional resources, which includes the link to the PDUFA commitment letter, as well as the FDA's STAR website, which I encourage you to visit for more information on the STAR program. And so to summarize, STAR's goal is to shorten the time from the date of complete submission to the action date to allow earlier patient access to therapies that address an unmet medical need. The application is submitted in 2 parts to enable earlier review and action. And also, STAR is only limited to priority efficacy supplements that meet a specific criteria. So again, this is just an overview of the STAR program. We went over all of the different parts. We now have gone through the process, including the STAR entry request. We discussed steps to get into the program. We discussed the application review and the submission Part 1 and Part 2, and the STAR target action date. So this is just a quick visual again of what we discussed. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Again, my name is LaShawn Schnupp, and I'm the CDER Program Manager for the STAR Pilot Program. And as a closing thought, please remember to include all components required for each of the 2-part submissions to utilize the benefits of the STAR Pilot Program. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be back shortly to answer any questions. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, my name is Dr. Lolita Surratt, and I'm from the Division of Medication Error Prevention and Analysis within OSC as part of CDER and FDA. And today I'm going to talk to you about the use-related risk analysis and human factors protocol reviews and what to submit for an efficient review. First, let's talk about our learning objectives. Define the objective of a use-related risk analysis. Define the objective of a human factors validation study protocol. Describe the biosimilar user fee amendments PDUFA 3, prescription drug user fee amendments PDUFA 7 commitments related to human factors submissions. Describe common agency-initiated information requests for HF submissions. Identify tips which may result in a more efficient agency review of URRA and human factors validation study protocol submissions. And lastly, discuss the importance of the early identification of human factor data needs for medical product development. A little bit about the division I work for, DMEPA. DMEPA resides within the super office called the Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology. OSE monitors and evaluates the safety profiles of drugs available to American consumers using a variety of tools and disciplines throughout the life cycle of drugs. OSE has 4 core functions: pharmacovigilance, pharmacoepidemiology, medication error prevention and analysis, and risk management. CDER is further divided into 2 offices and 5 divisions. Under OMEPRIM is where DMEPA lies, and DMEPA is highlighted here in green. Now let's talk a little bit about DMEPA's mission. Our mission is to increase the safe use of drug products by minimizing use error that is related to naming, labeling, packaging, or design of drug products. To achieve this mission, DMEPA is involved in all of the following: conducting a safety assessment of proprietary names for drug name confusion that may lead to wrong drug errors, and we serve as signatory for these name reviews. We are included in the review of labels, labeling, and packaging, and product design to promote safe use of medications. We review post-marketing error reports to identify safety signals and take action if needed. And we participate in the development of guidance for industry and FDA staff, work groups, and advisory committee meetings. Lastly, we review human factor studies and data to optimize product design and minimize the risk for use error that may lead to medication error. But who looks at medication errors? Safety evaluators. Within DMEPA, which was created in 1999, we're composed of healthcare professionals, scientists, and engineers with very professional backgrounds. We're further divided by therapeutic categories into DMEPA 1 and DMEPA 2. We lead CDER's review pertaining to medication error prevention and analysis and human factors for drug and therapeutic biologics. So we just said that DMEPA leads CDER in the review of medication error and the review of human factors evaluations for drugs and therapeutic biologics. But how do we do that? A key component of the evaluation of medication errors for combination products or complex drug products is to evaluate the submission for the need for human factors data. Keep in mind that we do not limit our focus on combination products. There may be human factors considerations or certain instances where we have complex instructions or novel packaging of drug products that are not considered combination drug products, but still their complexity may arise to a level of needing additional data to ensure safe use. Some of you may be familiar with our practices that we use to apply best practices to decrease vulnerability to medication error in labeling and naming of products. But how do we evaluate medication errors from a human factors perspective? It's important to note that we do not work alone. We consult with our experts within the agency to help us with those evaluations. So let's walk through the process of how DMEPA engages other offices within the agency to perform human factors evaluations. So after receiving a submission for review, DMEPA will determine if that submission is such that we need to consult other offices. At that time, we may issue an inter-center consult to a team such as CDRH and their human factors team when input is needed for certain device-heavy products. For example, we consult the CDRH human factors team for things like external infusion pumps or an on-body infuser, or maybe a software-driven medication dispenser or software-driven device. In those instances, we rely heavily on CDRH colleagues to provide their expertise in the device-heavy component of the proposed product. We use their conclusions about the device to help determine what and how those may weigh in on medication errors in the intended use of the proposed product. Depending on the intended user of the product, DMEPA may also consult the patient labeling team for review of the IFU to ensure that the language is patient-friendly. Let's say a particular combination product's IFU contains specific instructions for the lay user to administer the product in a home setting. In this instance, we consult PLT and work with them in the review of the IFU or quick reference guide to gather their input on how to best provide clear instruction for the layperson. After we get those consults back, we'll refer to them within our review and also use their input to help us determine what the data is needed for human factors considerations. Now, there are several different types of human factors, and let's define the types of human factors submissions that we'll discuss today. First, use-related risk analysis. The use-related risk analysis is a risk management tool that supports the entire human factors engineering process and should be utilized as part of an overall risk management framework. The URRA informs the human factors validation study design, testing, and evaluation of a medical product. A use-related risk analysis is important to help identify use-related hazards associated with the combination product, as well as to characterize risks so they can be mitigated or eliminated through improved product user interface design. As a reminder, conducting a use-related risk analysis is an iterative process. As part of the product development and testing of the product prior to agency review, there may be times during the product development when additional use risks or mitigations are identified. This could be identified as part of formative work or information gathered as part of clinical trials, but as a result, there may be additional changes to the user interface required to address use risk or to test mitigations. In these cases, it is a good practice to document and continuously update the URRA to reflect these iterations for a comprehensive record of use risk and how those risks are mitigated. Essentially, the URRA does help characterize use-related risks, and it's the risks that we're trying to characterize and understand in order to then consider if further risk mitigation strategies are needed. Now that we've identified the risks in our use-related risk analysis, how do we use that use-related risk analysis to determine or even design human factor data needs for the proposed product? First, based on the findings of the URRA, human factor data has been determined that it may be needed. So, the risk analysis may have identified use risks that need further mitigations in this case. If it is unclear if that risk mitigation proposed will address the risk, you may need to provide data from a human factors validation study to support that your mitigations are sufficient. The risk analysis can inform the design of your protocol. As part of your human factors protocol design, the risk analysis should be used to ensure that you've addressed all of the steps in the use of your product and include any use scenarios to study and address any possible use risks. The submission of a human factors validation study protocol for agency review is not required, but it is encouraged to ensure you that your methodology is appropriate to achieve the study's objective. By getting input from the FDA early on your protocol, that may help decrease pain points later on in your development process, especially after an application has been submitted. So, for example, you did not have any prior agency feedback on your protocol or your product development plans before you submitted your application for your NDA or BLA. You run the risk of the agency deeming that you need to submit human factors data as part of your marketing application, or if you've already completed your study without agency feedback on the protocol, we may then deem that your methodology is flawed and not accept the results. As a result, we may require a new study from the application, new study to support the application that has already been submitted. So these things will definitely eat into your timeline. So you've determined and we've agreed that data from a human factors data validation study is needed to support your marketing application. We reviewed your protocol, which I like to repeat and reiterate. A protocol review is optional but encouraged. And after these steps have been completed, the next step is to actually run the study. And what is the goal of a human factors validation study? A study which is conducted to demonstrate that the final finished combination product user interface can be used by the intended user without serious use errors or problems for the product's intended uses and under the expected use conditions. The study should demonstrate that use-related hazards for the final finished product has been eliminated or that the mitigation for residual risk are acceptable. These are the types of things we look for in the study. Of note, we generally find it feasible to conduct these studies under simulated use conditions, but there are rare occasions where we would need to see that study in actual use. When talking about study results, making errors is not always a bad thing because it is likely that use errors will occur in every study. Our focus, though, would be to learn from those errors to ensure that we are finding what mitigations are required and if we find the residual risk is acceptable. These are things that can be discussed in the Human Factors Validation Study Report. The study participants are representative of the intended users and study conditions and the expected use conditions is one key component that we would like to see in your study. In the past slides, we talked about human factors and we talked about drug products and we mentioned combination drug products. But what is a combination drug product? The formal definition can be found in 21 CFR 3.2, which reads, therapeutic and diagnostic products which combine more than one, either a drug, device, or biologic product. A combination product can combine drugs, devices, or biologics. They can be physically combined, for example, drug inside of an autoinjector, or chemically combined, such as a pill which is embedded with a sensor. Combination products can be co-packaged in a kit. For example, a drug vial, which is co-packaged with a syringe for administration or measurement. Or it can be separate cross-label products. For example, a drug label which indicates to use the drug with a specific device, like a nebulized drug, which is to be used with a 510K cleared nebulizer. And here are some examples of combination drug products. IV infusion bags, which are pre-filled syringes, pen injectors or auto-injectors, pharmaceutical aerosol delivery devices or inhalation products, transdermal delivery systems or patches, drug infusion devices, kits containing drug and administration devices. And because of the combination products may include drugs, biologics, devices, then you can imagine there are different regulations that we must adhere to. This is where it becomes important that we reach out to our agency experts in different areas, such as devices or biologics, to ensure that we provide accurate information about human factors needs without causing conflict. This is truly a group effort. As we discuss combination products, it's important to note that there are instances when we may ask a company to apply human factors considerations for products which are not combination. For example, birth control pills in a blister with a novel packaging design or a unique shape with blister labeling, which is unique enough that there could be a medication error concern of confusion for the intended user to determine where in that packaging to start and where in that blister to stop. If taken out of sequence or just taken incorrectly, this use error could result in pregnancy. So, in this case, we may ask the company to provide and evaluate the risk in the use of this product and this product design to be considered. It may stop there, or depending on what the risks are that have been identified, it may go further to the point where proposed mitigations are not enough and we need to see data from a simulated use human factors validation study. This is just an example, but it definitely could happen with novel packaging or novel unique design. In addition, we need to consider a new user group. New user groups could be an instance where a standalone vial presentation, and when I say standalone, I mean it is not co-packaged with syringes. It's just a vial itself. So that standalone vial is proposed to a new patient or caregiver user group who traditionally has not had exposure to withdrawing, preparing, or administering a dose from a vial presentation. Perhaps this group is accustomed to using an auto-injector or pre-filled syringe, something where it's already measured up and they just need to administer it. So in that case, we're comfortable with the administration steps, and we feel that those users will be aware of that. But for the task of preparing the vial, measuring a dose from the vial, those things will be new to this user group. In this case, we may not have enough data to assure us that the user will be able to perform these tasks as intended. We would advise the company to provide additional data to justify that this user will be able to understand and perform these new use tasks as intended. Additional data doesn't always mean study data. It could mean literature search, anything to justify your position that these intended users will be able to use this product as intended. What about complex instructions? This is another instance where it may not always be apparent that users will be able to prepare, measure, and administer the product as intended. This could be a unique product where, again, a standalone vial could be stored at room temperature, but once you combine that vial, which has lyophilized powder, once you combine that vial with the diluent, the vial must then be placed on a chiller before administration to activate the drug product. And once chilled, you have a limited amount of time to draw out the dose before it's no longer stable. A use error in any one of those steps could potentially lead to patient harm. So you see, these particular human factors considerations should be considered in other products, not just combination products, because they may have a use risk that causes a concern for a vulnerability to use error based on the design of the user interface or the design of the product characteristics. In these cases, it may not be so clear to the sponsor what human factor needs are required. This is why it's important to reach out to the agency early to help in that determination. You may be thinking, why is human factors data even a consideration? Let me walk you through the regulatory history for devices and briefly explain how we got here and where FDA's regulatory authority to consider human factor studies stem from. We can start with a device regulation 21 CFR 820.30, which is a regulation which in general requires each company to use quality control methods to establish and maintain procedures to control the design of the device in order to ensure that specified design requirements are met. The goal here is really to ensure the safe and effective use by implementing quality controls for the proposed device. For combination products, we may not always ask for data, but we always remind companies that according to this particular CFR, you have the obligation to ensure good manufacturing quality control methods have been used in the development of your product. Also, a drug regulation comes from the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, specifically the Kefauver-Harris Amendment to the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which is requirement to show that a drug is effective. Now, if we put the device regulation together for good quality, along with the amendment to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act for efficacy, we can further say that based on this information, human factor studies may be needed to be submitted for agency review to demonstrate minimization of elimination of use-related hazards and medication errors. The key words are may be needed. So we don't always ask for human factor studies data to be submitted to support the application. However, we do ask that you use tools to evaluate use risks and to subsequently determine if any additional human factor data is needed to be submitted for agency review to justify safety and efficacy of any proposed product. And these tools help in making that determination. You may also be thinking, when do I need to begin my considerations for human factors considerations? at what phase in your development. This slide shows drug development process and where human factors and DMEPA involvement fit in. So DMEPA usually begins within the IND, once the IND is filed, but sometimes it can be as early as pre-IND phase. Human factors work, including product design, preliminary analysis, formative work, and validation testing, can begin during pre-IND and can continue through phase 4, which is post-marketing. Updates to the use-related risk analysis are made continually throughout the drug development process as risk is continually assessed and reassessed. For example, if a company finds errors during the formative study and subsequently the design is modified for the product, then the URRA needs to be updated to reflect that modification. That revision needs to be assessed for risk. The same can apply for human factors validation study. If the sponsor identifies any failures or risks that could lead to patient harm, that particular failure needs to be assessed and mitigations need to be proposed and implemented. Those need to be updated as part of the URRA. Keeping in mind that after each revision to the user interface or product design, the sponsor also needs to determine whether or not, after updating the risk analysis, does that mitigation require an additional validation study, or if the revisions are such that it doesn't impact usability, there's no additional studies needed. That justification will be added to the human factors validation study report for our alignment. So continual updates to the risk analysis are key. Continually evaluating risk is important. So when we talk about user interface changes, please understand that the user interface is not only limited to the device. Anything that the intended user interacts with is the user device, its user interface. So that includes all points of interaction between the product and the users, including things like a display, a control, packaging, product labels, instructions for use, etc. Thus, knowing this definition of user interface helps us to understand why the term user interface is not limited to only combination drug products. It could be relevant for all drug products. Now that I've gone over some background information on human factors and some key terms, let's talk about the latest BsUFA and PDUFA commitments as it relates to human factors. The first commitment I'd like to talk about pertains to performance goals for human factors protocols submitted for biologics. So beginning in fiscal year 2023, which is October 1st, coming up 2022, we agree to review and provide the sponsor with written comments for 90% of filed human factors validation protocol submissions within 60 days of receipt of that protocol submission for biologics. What this means is that in addition to the already human factors validation study protocols that we currently review for drugs, we will now add the review of those biologic human factors protocols. It is likely that the number of human factors protocol submissions to the agency may increase with this agreement to reach 90% performance goal for all those protocols submitted to the agency. So as you can imagine, we really have our work cut out for us here with these protocol submissions. Another commitment which is related to human factors is about URRA submissions. In summary, we have agreed to a staged implementation of the review for use-related risk analysis in PDUFA 7 and BsUFA 3. We agreed to review and notify sponsors of agreement or non-agreement with comments within 60 days of receipt for 50% of filed submissions beginning in fiscal year 2024. After that, we'll agree to 70% of filed submissions within 60 days will be reviewed. And then lastly, in fiscal year 26-27, we agreed to notify sponsors within 60 days of receipt for 90% of filed human factors use-related risk analysis submissions So in the past, although we have provided a review and written recommendations for use-related risk analysis submissions, we've not had a commitment for the review timelines of URR submission by a certain time frame. With this implementation of PDUFA 7 and BsUFA 3, along with the goals I just talked about, the number of URRA submissions to the agency we expect to increase as of October 1st. So the last commitment to discuss here today relates to a new guidance. With the increase in URRA submissions, we would like to ensure that the submissions are comprehensive and complete. So by the end of fiscal year 2024, FDA will publish a new draft guidance for review staff and industry describing considerations related to drug device, biologic device, and drug products on the topics such as guidance that will convey FDA's current thinking regarding how a URRA, along with other information, can be used to inform when the results from an HF validation study may need to be submitted to a marketing application. This guidance will also provide a comprehensive, systematic, and stepwise approach with examples, when applicable, to illustrate how to make this determination. This is important because if you recall in my last slide, I said that we have never had any commitment as far as an enforceable review clock as far as URRA submissions are concerned. So we were in the past able to provide a thorough and detailed review of URRAs that were submitted to the agency in a reasonable time frame as possible. However, with the new implementation of URRA goal dates, we are required to meet the review of URRA in 60 days as of October 1st. So we have had some time and experience with these reviews over the past few years, so we are familiar with the review process. However, to ensure that we are providing a good and comprehensive yet timely service in the review of these URRA submissions, we need to be able to provide the tools and guidance to industry, enable for you guys to be able to follow for a complete submission. And this guidance will eliminate a lot of back and forth on what we need to perform our review. And just to note, this guidance is currently under penmanship, but it's not quite yet published. Okay, so now we've gone over some background materials and also discussed some new commitments. In light of these new commitments, how can we cut back on the amount of time we spend gathering necessary information or lacking information to perform an efficient agency review? I'll go over a few times when we could not complete our review or the review of human factors data was delayed due to a lack of clarity or missing information in the human factors submission. I'll also give you some tips on how to avoid these issues and lead to a more efficient and timely review. Oftentimes, when we're in a position where we cannot perform a comprehensive review at the agency level, it's because of confusion or uncertainty regarding human factors data needs. The company who submitted the submission may not be aware of or may be unsure of what the human factors requirements are. So how does one find out what human factor data needs are required? We have guidances which are available, and references are included at the end of this presentation to refer you to those guidances. But the first step would be to refer to the guidance which the agency has developed to help outline the process. Although we aim to write our guidance as basic as possible, sometimes there may be situations which are unique or novel, and those basic guidances may not provide exactly what a company needs to formulate their submission. This may lead to more questions, not specifically addressed in the guidance because they're more custom questions. Remember, a guidance is a suggested guide, which should cover the most routine situations. It may not always meet your needs as the only resource if you have any unique or novel circumstances. In that situation, early interaction with the agency to ensure that you've prepared for and consider if any human factor data needs exist for your proposed product. This will help and lead to an early determination that your product is a combination product or has been identified as a product which requires additional studies based on novel or unique design. In this case, it's determined that data from a human factors validation study is needed to support your application. We have performed a review of the protocol for the company. We provided written comments, and now the company is back and they submitted a response to previous human factors advice, but there are not enough details provided or maybe no questions submitted to help us determine what exactly is needed in this submission. Thus, we're left to figure out what is needed. What are we reviewing? To avoid this delay, we have to ask questions. We have to send an IR. Do you need clarity on recommendations previously made? Did you implement all of our recommendations? Did you disagree with any of our recommendations? And because of this, we need to wait for your response. And it's important to provide clarity on the intent of your submission is the key takeaway for this slide. If we don't know what actions you want us to perform, we may spend time combing through the submission, trying to figure out exactly what is our task at hand. We'll then need to send an IR asking these clarifying questions that I just read below in this slide. And after we have these answers, then and only then are we able to proceed with our review. However, the back and forth with the IRs will eat away at your timeline. So what can you do to preserve this timeline? We think that the use of the cover letter is a good idea. Use the cover letter to give us a quick summary of what you need from the agency. Communicate your intent that way. For example, you may say, we have aligned with most of the agency's recommendations and seek clarification on recommendations 4 and 7 as part of the cover letter. And then this is just a suggestion, but it helps us keep everything in one spot. But to help clarify, we'd like you to format your submission of those questions using the same table presentation that the agency initially sent, just adding an additional column with your concerns over to the right. Again, this is not a requirement, but using this particular format helps us understand what was the identified concern, what was the agency recommendation, and what does the sponsor have a concern with in response to that recommendation. A third example of an issue we've encountered here in the human factors submission is we have received a revised human factors protocol, but we don't know why that revised protocol was submitted. What is the intent again? There may be instances when you want the agency to provide another review of your revised human factors protocol. This could be when we previously reviewed the protocol and provided recommendations, but the revisions that were implemented were significant enough that it warrants a new and complete review of the protocol once again. This could be a case where the user groups have changed or the device design has changed significantly enough that it required additional tasks, or even the company who initially proposed the product has changed hands and they want to go in a different direction. These things could warrant a totally new review. Alternatively, there may be instances where the intent is just to submit your revised protocol for documentation's sake. So, do you align with all our recommendations that were given, but you're just submitting a revised protocol for the record? We've seen this in certain instances where we've already performed a review of your protocol, we provided recommendations, and we got that second submission without detail. We're not sure if you want another review or if you want just to document for record. So both of these situations would result in an IR being sent out to clarify the intent of the submission. Again, those IRs will take time to be once cleared from the agency, then sent from the agency, then we have to wait a response. It could take a week or more to get this particular issue rectified. So what can be done? Again, we suggest clarity in the cover letter. It's a very quick way to let us know that you are simply submitting the revised protocol for the record, or you truly do request an additional review of the revised protocol. So here's a few two example languages that we've seen in the cover letter. It may say, we have aligned with the agency's recommendations and are submitting the final human factors protocol for the record. Or we may have had something similar to, we've determined that our user groups are no longer representative. This revised human factors protocol provides a new methodology as well as new user groups. And this is just one point of clarification I'd like to make. I want to make sure it's clear that adding a summary sentence or two to the cover letter does not mean we do not need the details in the submission. We still need that detailed information about the revision that you made to your protocol in order to make our determination on the acceptability of the new components of your submission. So providing those comprehensive details within the submissions are still warranted. Along the same lines as the previous slide, this is in situation number 4, when we may get a revised protocol submitted for agency review, and there's a quick summary in the cover letter that tells us exactly what's changed and that the changes were significant enough to warrant another review. Our first thought is, well, what are those changes that we need to look at? So, for example, what revisions were made to the methodology? What are the revisions to the moderator script, if any? Are there any changes to the IFU? And do any of these changes require updates to the URRA? These are 4 questions that may impact our previous review and also may impact our forthcoming recommendations. So these questions do not have to be answered in the cover letter, but they need to be considered and included within your submission. It would be beneficial if we knew what those changes are before and after, so that we can provide a more comprehensive review. One helpful approach to provide with your submission in this case is when you have submitted a revised protocol for review, provide us with a side-by-side or a red line version to identify those changes. This way we can easily pinpoint the revisions and then make a quicker determination on what has changed and how that change may impact our previous determinations. This is in addition to a clean version of your human factors protocol within your submission. So this approach may be helpful to ensure that none of the new or revised information impacts our previous recommendations. The annotation in your submission of what has changed will lead to a more efficient review, combined with a high-level summary in your cover letter that, yes, we do need a review for this particular reason. So in example number 5, there are times when we have human factors protocol submissions and we find that the URRA is incomplete or missing. If there's no URRA, then that's problematic because as I spoke earlier, I stated that the URRA is the backbone for the human factors protocol submission. Sometimes we get a high-level URRA, or maybe only a few select critical tasks have been evaluated. But without a comprehensive URRA of all steps in use of the product, we will not know the task criticality, or even if the use scenarios that are selected are needed to be included in the protocol. In these instances, we'll be forced to send an IR asking for a detailed list of exactly what's needed. We cannot move forward without this particular missing information because, like I stated before, the URRA is very critical to us evaluating the methodology of the protocol. So in the letter that you receive from us, we'll include language, something similar to, until we have this URRA information submitted to us, we will be unable to proceed with our review. So what do you do to prevent this from happening? Well, guidances are available. We do have one guidance, the content of a complete submission for threshold analysis and human factor submissions to drug and biologic applications, which is still in draft, but it does offer some guidance for what to expect to be included in a human factors protocol submission. And because the risk analysis is the backbone of the protocol submission, it's very important that that risk analysis is very detailed and it has evaluated all steps in the use of the product, providing things like task criticality, proposed mitigations, things that you see here at the table as table headers. If we do not have all this information in the use-related risk analysis, we'll send that detailed IR out again. The guidance is there to help you to avoid us with the IR and the back and forth. So human factors protocol submissions, issue number 6 in the user interface. These are examples where when we will send a letter to you asking for missing information about things like description of intended product uses, use environments, intended dosing, training. These are things we need in order to make sure that all steps in the use of the product have been considered. We need graphical depictions of labels and labeling, things that help us to see what the intended user will see and how they will interact, and how we need to have user in scenarios built around them. If there's no IFU, we need that IFU in order to go through the steps in use of the product. We don't have an IFU, then we don't know if all the risks have been involved because we don't know how the product is intended to be used. So we need all of these user interface pieces in order for us to go forward with our review. So what can we do? In this case, again, refer to that same guidance, contents of a complete submission for threshold analysis and human factor submission for drug and biologic applications. And without this detailed information, I think I made it clear that we cannot move forward, and it limits our ability to opine on the acceptability of your protocol methodology or if all the risks have been considered. So additional information of what we consider a complete submission is included in that draft guidance, and I encourage you to use it as a resource. Challenge question number 1. When determining if your proposed product may need human factors data, you should include a narrative of your independent determination once you submit your NDA or BLA. Reach out to discuss with the agency as early as possible before you submit your NDA or BLA. Leave the box on the 356H form unchecked, and someone will reach out to you to follow up. Or the FDA does not allow the approval of combination products. And the correct answer would be B. Reach out to us as early as possible before you submit your NDA. I think I've noted several times here that early interaction is key. Challenge question number 2. Which of the following statement is true? Only combination products require submission of human factors validation data to support safe use. If you are approved for an accelerated approval, like fast track, your proposed product is exempt from the submission of human factors data. It is safe to say that a product proposed in a vial presentation for self-administration will never require human factors data. Or D, a use-related risk analysis is important to help identify use-related hazards associated with combination products, as well as to characterize risks so they can be mitigated or eliminated through improved product interface design. So the answer is D. We need to know, the use-related risk analysis is the backbone. So we need to make sure we have that in order to determine any type of risks in the use of the product and how that would impact your product interface design. So in summary, I'd like to thank you all for your attention. But in summary, here we have learned about or heard about the implementation of PDUFA 7 and BsUFA 3 and the number of protocol submissions to agency, which we think may increase. And to ensure the timely and efficient review, it is imperative that each human factors submission is a complete submission. And we recommend you come to us early to seek advice on your human factors development plan and to determine if we see any indication to encourage you submit. We encourage you to submit your human factors validation study protocol for agency review. So based on this information and the concerns, we want to ensure that your submissions that you send us in are in good shape and for provide an efficient review. In closing, my hope is that you're able to use these tips in such a manner that they will contribute to the efficient review of your proposed product. So we'd like you to consider your call to action is to review the information presented today and your future submissions to help to ensure a complete and timely review. This is a slide of resources. And now I'd like to open up for questions.
Thank you both for those excellent presentations. We will now begin our Q&A panel session for these two presentations. And we'll also be joined by J. Paul Phillips, Director of the Office of Program Operations in CDER's Office of New Drugs. And if you have not yet had a chance to enter your questions into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We will answer as many questions as time allows. So we do have some questions that have come in. Our first question is for Dr. Schnupp. Dr. Schnupp, what is the difference between STAR and RTO?
Good question. So STAR is a PDUFA program open to development programs from any therapeutic area, whereas RTOR or the Real-Time Oncology Review is not a PDUFA program, and it's only available for oncology development programs. And if you have more questions about RTOR, oncology product sponsors should contact the RPM in the Office of Oncologic Diseases, or OOD, their division seeing their application. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schnupp. Next question. If an ISE/ISS is not needed for a supplemental NDA per agreement with the review division, is the STAR program then not appropriate?
This is another good question. So in that case, benefits of the timeline for the program would not be realized since there couldn't be a Part 2 submission. So it would not be a good fit for the STAR program if you do not plan to have an ISS or an ISE. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schnupp. Let's do one more question for you. What if you failed to submit Part 2 within 3 months of the Part 1 submission? Would the STAR submission then be canceled?
Good question. Thank you. Yes, the application would be removed from the STAR program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schnupp. Let's move on to Dr. Starrett. So your first question is, how would sponsors know when to submit a use-related risk analysis for a product? Not all products would require a URRA, correct?
Yes, thank you for that question. It is a great question, and it is one that we get quite often. It is correct that a risk analysis will measure risks of the use for your proposed product, but not all products require a use-related risk analysis. One of the clear-cut ways is to know when you need to submit a risk analysis is considering when you have a combination drug product. For those, a use-related risk analysis should always be developed to examine what the risks are in the use of that product to make sure that you've addressed all the potential errors in the use of that combination drug product. If your risk analysis doesn't identify any new or unique risks in the use of that product, then we would still need to see your risk analysis along with the justification that you have determined that no new data is needed because there's no new or unique risks that have been identified in the use of your product. So that is kind of a clear-cut way. Everyone is pretty clear on combination drug products, but when it gets tricky is when you don't have a combination drug product. This could be yes or no. You may or may not need to submit a use-related risk analysis. And when you don't have a combination drug product, you still may have risk in use of your product. So we still need to see a risk analysis in cases of something like novel packaging, or if there's a new identified user group for an already established product, or if there are complex instructions that are needed in order to safely administer or measure or prepare your proposed product. So this gets to be tricky because these are subjective opinions of what is novel packaging, what is complex instructions. So in that case, we like for you to reach out to us early to, just to get a peek at what you're proposing. And in the times when we have determined that your particular product could be prone to use error or could be confused and lead to medication error leading to patient harm, this is when we would advise you at that time that it would be a good idea to provide or complete a comprehensive use-related risk analysis to determine that no risk would be presented to the intended users of your product. So that was a long way to say, I guess it depends, but you do not need to always submit a use-related risk analysis. There are times when it's clear-cut and there are times when it's not. But in any event, reaching out early to the agency to have a discussion on your product development would be beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Starrett, for that very informative response. We do have another question on use-related risk analysis. So when a sponsor submits a human factors validation protocol for FDA review, do they also need to submit the use-related risk analysis? Do you review that as well? And when should this protocol be submitted for FDA review?
Thank you for your question. That's a great question. So we have a draft guidance actually, that is titled Contents of a Complete Submission. And within that guidance, it provides details of what you should include with each type of submission. Now, we don't go into details on how to evaluate the human factors submissions there in this guidance, but we do give you kind of like a checklist of what to include with each particular type of human factors submission. So for a human factors protocol, yes, we do need a use-related risk analysis to be submitted as part of a human factors protocol submission. As mentioned earlier, we know that a use-related risk analysis is considered to be the backbone of your human factors development process, because it examines the risks and help us to identify what particular use scenarios need to be evaluated in your protocol. If there are any use steps that are identified as problematic, then those use steps could be focused on as critical in your evaluation and your human factors validation study. So yes, we do need the use-related risk analysis. We will review it. As part of our protocol review, one of the key steps is to review the use-related risk analysis in combination with the instructions for use to make sure that every step that is in your IFU is also included in your use-related risk analysis. And once those steps have been determined, that all steps have been evaluated and considered, then and only then can we give the comprehensive review that your human factors protocol methodology as far as the steps is complete. And I think the last question is, when do you need to submit your human factors protocol? So just to reiterate, the submission of a human factors protocol is not required, but it is recommended. And we do recommend that you send us your protocol before you do your study. So before you run your study. And we ask that the human factors protocol be submitted as part of the IND phase. Just keeping in mind that we need a minimum of 60 days to provide a written response for the review of your protocol. So you need to factor that into your product development plan. But like I mentioned, it's not a requirement, but if you don't submit your human factors protocol for review prior to running your study, that is a business decision that you can make for your company. But just know that once you've completed your study and you've submitted your formal marketing application, we will look at your results and we'll evaluate your results to see if they are indicative of ensuring safe use for the intended users and use environments, etc. But if the methodology that you use as part of your study is something that we cannot align with, we may ask that you provide additional data. And one good way to make sure that we're in alignment with your methodology is to have us do a review of your human factors protocol before you actually run your study. So I think I answered all of those questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Surratt. So Dr. Schnupp, we have a couple more questions for you. The first question is, does the STAR pilot apply to oncology products, or should oncology applicants only pursue RTOR?
Good question. So both STAR and RTOR, they are available to oncology products. Sponsors may discuss their preference with the RPM of the relevant division for their particular product. Thank you.
Okay, your next question. Is STAR available only to supplemental applications?
Yes, so currently STAR is only available for certain efficacy supplements. And as I noted during the presentation, assessments will be conducted to consider the feasibility of expansion in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schnupp. Let's see, another question for you, asking how long will the pilot plan run for the STAR program?
That's another good question. Thank you. It is premature to discuss since we will be conducting assessments and workshops in order to evaluate STAR, and we have not yet received feedback and results from those efforts, which will help inform us of any decisions about next steps. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more question for you. How does STAR compare to BTD if the criteria for clinical evidence are similar?
Again, that's also a very good question. So Breakthrough Therapy Designation, or BTD, it primarily provides benefits during the development or IND phase, whereas STAR is more intended to provide a benefit during the early review of the supplemental marketing application. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schnupp. Let's move back to Dr. Surratt for a few more questions. Dr. Surratt, can you please provide a typical sample size and duration for a human factors study validation?
Hi, yes, thank you for your question. So a typical sample size, it will depend on your number of distinct users, how many different types of distinct users you have. So we usually require, or we suggest and recommend 15 distinct users per user group. So that final number of sample size will change depending on if your product is intended to be used in healthcare providers only, or if it's to be used in patients, caregivers, and then there may even be subsets of patients who are injection naive or injection experienced. We even sometimes have a distinct user group who are distinct because of their age. So the final sample size number is something that's going to be unique to your specific product, but and I guess in the intended use of the product as well. But what we do know is based on references that we use here at FDA, it's been published that a sample size of 15 is sufficient to find a minimum of 90% and an average of 97% of all use problems. So that's going to be your starting number. It's going to be 15 per distinct user group. Now, the second question about the duration. The duration of your study is also going to depend on how many steps are required to use your product. So if you have a fairly small or short instructions for use with, just a few steps, then of course your study will be shorter. But if you have a complex product, which may have an upwards of 10, 20 steps in order to administer your product, that's going to drive the duration as well. Just want to reiterate that an agency review of your draft protocol before you complete your study will help us determine if you've identified the correct sample size and the correct intended user number of distinct users, so that we can say that your methods are acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, one more question for you. Is submission of product samples required in order for FDA to evaluate the human factors validation protocol? If yes, how many samples? Will FDA allow the sponsor to set up the product for FDA reviewers in the same way that the sponsor sets it up for users?
Thank you for your question. That's a great question. So samples are not required for the review of a human factors protocol. We do realize that by the time we receive a submission to review a human factors protocol, it is fairly early on in the product development process. We do expect that within the human factors validation study, you are evaluating the product that you intend to market as close as possible to the intent to market product. But we do also realize that sometimes you may not have a physical sample for whatever reasons. We have had issues with people getting us samples due to mailing or transportation types of concerns. But if we don't have a physical sample, we would like to have a graphical depiction at least, so that we could look at a real picture of what was used in the study and to see all sides of the labeling, the carton, the container, the device itself, if it contains the device. So it's not a requirement that you submit samples. It is ideal, and we would love to have samples. But if not, we would work with you to get an alternate means of us evaluating your samples. So I think that was it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's turn it back over to Dr. Schnupp. Dr. Schnupp, if the drug product and packaging are conducted, if DP and packaging are conducted in the US, but API is manufactured at ex-US, excuse me, would this disqualify from participating in the STAR Pilot Program? Would this disqualify from participating in the STAR Pilot Program?
Another great question. Thank you. Due to the timelines for scheduling a foreign inspection, they do not align with the intent and timelines for the STAR program. So supplemental applications that require an inspection of a foreign manufacturing site do not qualify for STAR. And therefore, whether a supplement with an active pharmaceutical ingredient or API manufactured at an ex-US site with qualified depends on whether or not review of the supplement would require inspection of the ex-US site. If FDA determined that an inspection is required at the foreign site, then the supplement would not qualify for STAR. So thank you for that question.
Thanks. And one more for you. How long will the pilot program or the pilot plan run for the STAR program?
Again, it's premature to discuss since we will be conducting assessments and workshops to evaluate STAR. And we haven't yet received feedback from the results from those efforts, which will help us in terms of informing us of any decisions about next steps. So thank you.
Okay, Dr. Starrett, we have a few more questions for you. The first one, what is the agency's timeline for review of clarifying questions for a response to a previous human factors advice?
Great question. Okay, so the agency timeline for review of clarifying questions for previously provided advice. Well, because we've already provided a response in writing in advance, we should be very familiar with the protocol and we won't need much time to get back to the sponsor on their clarifying question. Usually we can get that back fairly quickly, considering the clarifying question is submitted very soon after our initial correspondence. That would be, helpful. So it's kind of still fresh in our minds. But if there may be times when the clarifying question is very complex, or if that question may require us to reach out to our counterparts, our colleagues in the FDA for additional input for the experts in their field, and we don't have a established timeline per se for getting back on those clarifying questions. So I guess in this case, the answer would be it depends on how much time we need to put into considering the response. However, we are aware that these questions are necessary to be answered to move forward with the sponsor study. So we keep that in mind and make sure that our goal is to get back to the sponsor as soon as possible so as not to um, hold up their development process for their human factors timeline. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question for you. If I am submitting a user-related risk analysis, must I also submit comparative analyses?
Thank you for that question. Okay, so this is also going to be an answer that's going to be, it depends. Well, let's start with, as I stated in the presentation, the risk analysis we know is going to be used as the backbone for submission of the human factors to determine if any human factors data is needed. Because, it's going to determine what risk is needed and the use of the product, and also determine if any additional mitigations are identified that are needed for risk controls. So when considering the submission of a comparative analysis, it's going to be in conjunction with the use-related risk analysis. The risk analysis may be used, the comparative analysis could be used as a supportive documentation to the risk analysis. And when I say that, I mean that in your risk analysis, if you determined any level of risks, you can also provide a comparative analysis to identify a comparator that's similar or same, and go through an exercise where you will do a comparison with the labels, the labels, and the tasks to determine if there are any already or same similar products on the market that are already approved in that presentation, and use that comparative analysis as kind of a tool or a reference item to say that, hey, this product is already marketed. It's very same or similar as the one that I have. This controls are already put in place. So I should not have to provide any additional data. So we'll ask the sponsor to use the comparative analysis just to justify that their product is whatever is different about their product, or whatever risk has been identified for their product in the risk analysis. We'll use the comparative analysis as a tool to justify that there's no need for submission of additional risk because of what's already been proven in the market. So if the sponsor will determine that there's no need for additional data based on the risk analysis, and they submit a comparative analysis to further validate that conclusion, then we will provide, we'll ask that they submit that along with the justification so that we could look at both the risk analysis and the comparative analysis before we make a determination that we agree no additional data is needed. So it becomes a tool for, I guess, supportive documentation that no additional study is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we might be able to squeeze in one more question for you. I am not sure that my human factors protocol methodology is correct. Is there an option to request a meeting and to ask for questions on my protocol design?
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you for that question. If you're not sure that your protocol methodology is correct, we would like for you to, first of all, just submit your protocol. A meeting to have us review your protocol is not always the most efficient way to look and see if we can help you with your methodology, just because of the time constraints and the amount of comprehensive study that we need, comprehensive review that we need to provide. So what we'd like you to do is submit that protocol to the agency for review. And then what we'll do is ask that you also provide those same questions that you have for us that you wanted to submit as a meeting. Provide those questions with your protocol submission. And then we'll do a comprehensive review of your protocol and your questions and get back to you within 60 days in a written format so that you'll be able to move forward with your product development. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the presenters and to the audience for asking the questions, the presenters for answering, and for the great presentations. That's all the time we have for questions right now. And so let's take a short break and we will reconvene at 11 o'clock Eastern time. Thank you.